Hello everyone, this is Kathy Barnette. I hope all is going well with you today. So the Senate confirmations are now upon us, and several of President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks are going through Senate confirmations. A very notable candidate is Senator Jeff Sessions. He is President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General. Now, I'm sure there are those on the left and on the right who will come up with a number of objections to why Senator Jeff Sessions should not be confirmed as Attorney General. But perhaps one of the largest objections that will be placed before him this week is that of him being a racist, is that of him being prejudiced, is that of him being racially insensitive. Now, Senator Jeff Sessions is not new to the rodeo. He actually went through Senate confirmation in 1986 when President Ronald Reagan elected him for the federal judge position. And during that 1986 confirmation, he was denied the federal judge position, and he was denied for the very reasons that I just said to you now, that I'm sure is going to come back up before him, and that is for the reason of him being deemed as racist and insensitive, racially insensitive. Now, one of the things we have to understand in our culture today is that if you are a conservative, and you have been alleged to have committed a crime, and that crime deals with racism or prejudice of any kind, if you are a conservative, you are guilty until proven innocent. It is none of that being innocent until proven guilty spill. If you are a conservative and your alleged crime is being prejudiced or racist of any, regardless of the situation, you are guilty until proven innocent. And that's a very important concept to understand in our culture today. And so that is the banner under which Senator Jeff Sessions is now standing before the Senate committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the banner under which he is hopefully will be confirmed. But now, as an American, I'm concerned. I'm interested. As a Black American, I'm especially interested in what Senator Sessions said, the context in which he said it, and what it means as for him to be the potential Attorney General. It matters to me. So as a result, I did a little digging, and I went back and I looked at the 1986 judicial review that he went through for his federal judge nomination at the time. And there are a number of allegations that were brought against him, but there were two that were perhaps the most prominent ones. And so I want to talk to you about those two today as we kind of look to answer the question, is Senator Jeff Sessions a racist? Because again, as a Black American, it matters to me. As an American, it matters to me, and I'm sure it matters to you as well. As a Black American, I'm especially interested in whether or not our Attorney General is a racist, because as you know, the Attorney General position is the highest office in the land. So again, it matters. Here are the two significant allegations that were brought against him in 1986, and Schumer has said he will be bringing those things up to bear now before Senator Sessions. So here it is. One of them is he was alleged to have called the NAACP and a number of other organizations un-American. Now, Senator Sessions was denied the federal judge position because he was deemed as being prejudiced and insensitive, or having made prejudiced and insensitive comments, specifically calling the NAACP and other organizations un-American organizations with anti-traditional American values. Now, a key testimony against Sessions was someone who worked for him, and that was Assistant U.S. Attorney of Alabama, Thomas Figures, who was a Black man who worked again for Session at the time. In fact, his office was across the hall from Session. Now, when Session, in reading the judicial review comments, Session said he recalls his conversation with Thomas Figures at the time very differently than how Figures recalled it. In fact, Session said, this is how I recalled it. I recalled it with me saying, when organizations like the NAACP and other organizations move away from discriminatory issues and start to take up political issues, they lose their authority to speak to the people as unbiased parties. So that is what he recalls saying, that when organizations like the NAACP and other organizations move away from the discriminatory issues and start to pick up political issues, that those organizations lose their ability to speak to the people as unbiased parties. Because as most of you know, the NAACP is decidedly a Democrat organization. And so when they walk into the sphere where conservatives are, they lose their authority to speak to people as unbiased parties, as parties who are solely concerned with the moral advancement of all people. They lose that. So that's what he said. He said that the NAACP and other organizations lose support when they involve themselves in promoting un-American positions. To that extent, Senator Ted Kennedy at the time challenged him on what un-American positions these organizations such as the NAACP had taken up, to which Session said, pointed to two issues, and that was the sanctuary movement at that time, which dealt with liberal immigration policies, as well as the Sandinistas, which was a part of the Iran-Contra scandal. You guys may remember that. So those were the two un-American traditions that Senator Session pointed to. Now, here are my thoughts. I agree with Sessions. I agree that when organizations such as the NAACP and other organizations move away from the reason why they exist and begin to pick up other political topics, they do indeed begin to lose some of their authority. In fact, the NAACP is one of those organizations that have been struggling for some time since the civil rights movement. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Freedom Bureau. The Freedom Bureau was an organization that the Freedmen's Bureau was an organization that was started to assist former slaves who had been emancipated. Now, at the time that the Freedmen's Bureau existed, they were needed. They were very much needed to help freed slaves who had just been emancipated to be able to assimilate into the culture around them. The Freedmen's Bureau was responsible for helping freed slaves to negotiate contracts, to get fair contracts for their work. The Freedmen's Bureau helped build schools for freed slaves. They helped them purchase land. They helped them in a variety of ways. They helped them begin the very arduous, difficult task of assimilating into the very culture that wanted them to go back into slavery. So the Freedmen's Bureau was a very necessary organization at that time. Now, fast forward, the Freedmen's Bureau eventually, now there were the number of political reasons why they stopped existing and stopped being funded and supported by the government, but also with the passing of time, they lost their reason for existing. And as a result, they no longer exist. The Freedmen's Bureau no longer exists. But at one point in history, they were very necessary. Likewise, the NAACP. There was a point in human history, in American history, when the NAACP was very necessary. But since the Civil Rights Movement, the NAACP has been flailing a bit. They've been struggling to legitimize their continued existence. And so I agree with Senator Jeff Sessions when he called or when he said that organizations such as the NAACP, that they begin to lose some of their authority to speak to people when they begin to move away from the reason why they exist and begin to pick up political issues. It causes them to inherently become biased. They have to pick a side. And when your position, or when your reason for existence is to shine a spotlight on moral behaviors, you begin again to lose some of your authority. So to that extent, I agree with Senator Jeff Sessions in regards to his comments made about the NAACP. I also want to say, because again, Thomas Figures worked for Senator Jeff Sessions at the time as the assistant U.S. attorney for Southern Alabama, and his office was right across the hall from Senator Sessions at the time. And I don't know about you guys, but I remember being in corporate America, and I remember having unguarded conversations. I remember having some water cooler conversations, philosophizing about life and being unguarded. And I would hate for all of my unguarded conversations to come back to light and to be used to define who I am today. And so I see it as co-workers bantering, philosophizing about the greater goods in life. And I tend to agree with his comment regarding the NAACP. So when you see them talk about Senator Jeff Sessions making comments alleging that the NAACP is an un-American organization, I disagree that he said it was an un-American organization in that context, and I believe that the context was as he stated it. Time will tell, but I do believe so. Now, that was one of the major allegations that was made against Senator Sessions. Another allegation that was made against him was the infamous one that we have heard for so long, and that is when Sessions made the comment, "I thought those guys, the KKK, were okay until I learned they smoked pot." And in fact, Sessions confirmed that he did in fact say that. He did in fact say, "I thought those guys, the KKK, were okay until I learned they smoked pot." Now, Sessions says that that it was a joke and that he did not think anyone took him seriously. Well, apparently some people did take him seriously. He made the comment in front of a mixed crowd. It was not just black people, it was not just white people, it was a mixture of black and whites in that room that particular evening when he said that. Now, he said it was a joke. There were two attorneys from the Justice Department who testified during Sessions' 1986 Senate confirmation for the federal judge pick. And they stated that they were in the room, that they did in fact hear Sessions make that statement, but that they took it as a joke. And they actually qualified it as operating room humor. So here are the facts of the case. Sessions' office was prosecuting the case of one of the Klansmen who brutally murdered a young black man who was simply walking home one evening from 7-Eleven. And on the way home, this particular Klansman and several others kidnapped him, brutally beat him, brutally slashed him, mutilated his body, and then they inhumanely disposed of his body. And according to Sessions, as he was reviewing the reports of this particular Klansman, in the report, it stated that the Klansman left one meeting and was on his way to another meeting. But along the way, he stopped to smoke pot. Secession, that was a weird statement to have been included in the report, and so he found himself trying to analogize it, trying to put it in context. It was a weird statement. He tried to analogize it, and he said what he said, which was, I thought those guys at KKK were okay until I learned they smoked pot. Now, he thought, I mean, he even said that it was a coarse joke, but here's my thought. This is a hard one. And I will not sugarcoat the reality. As a black woman with black children from a black family, this is a hard one to grapple with. You cannot hear that statement, know the context in which it was said as they were prosecuting a Klansman, and then just check it off as if you're checking off your grocery list. It's a hard statement, and I will not sugarcoat it. However, in context, I can clearly see that it was not meant to be malicious. It was meant, Session called it a joke. I call it not funny, but I do not call it malicious. I do not call it being said with contempt and ill will in mind. I consider it, as I've said, not funny, poor judgment, but not malicious, not racist, not intended for ill will and malice. You know, what's interesting about Democrats is that they have this dual standard. They have this very high moral standard that they try to hold conservatives to. Yet they themselves get to bend the rules when it relates to one of them. Because let me tell you what is prejudice. When Hillary Clinton, who was not running for Attorney General, but was running for President of our United States, called young black men super predators, that's racist. That's prejudice. That's racially insensitive. When she called young black men super predators, animals without conscience, young men, young animals who will rape and pillage you with very little consideration, that's racist. Or when Hillary Clinton called Mexicans, blacks, and Romanians losers, and while Asians and Jews are winners regardless of the economic situation you place them in, that's racially insensitive. And so, again, although Session called it a joke, I call it not funny. I call it poor timing at best. But I do not call it malicious. I do not call it ill will, ill intent. I call it not funny. I call it real bad timing. And I suggest that we hold Democrats to the same standard that they try to hold everyone else to. In closing, I thought it was interesting that Senator Jeff Sessions was born and raised not too far from where I was born and raised in southern Alabama. In fact, he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama for 6 years. So I thought it was interesting that being the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Alabama, these are the two most egregious allegations they could come across. Because if you know anything about the Deep South, you know some egregious, heinous things happen. And I go home once a year, and there is still a great divide. There is still inequalities around that particular area where I grew up. And again, Senator Jeff Sessions and I grew up not too far from one another. So we are both very aware of the ugly face of racism. And I thought it was notable that these two allegations are the worst things they could come up with at the time. Because if he is truly a racist man with truly ill intent and ill will at the core of his heart, I can guarantee you, being in Southern Alabama, there would be much more egregious allegations that would have been brought against him. In fact, Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, who was one of the judicial committee people in 1986 who denied Sessions confirmation to the federal judge pick, he has in fact now recanted, saying it was a mistake for him to deny Sessions the federal judge pick. I think that's notable as well. I hope this was helpful, because for what it's worth, I would pick Senator Jeff Sessions as our next Attorney General. I hope this was helpful. You guys take care. Bye-bye.